had a conversation with Nate Seacrest. He's the lobbyist for RJ Reynolds. And he said flat out, we want our market share back. You guys got too big. We want our market share back. And they've used the FDA PMTA process for the last decade in an attempt to monopolize an industry that they recognize they're not going to be able to compete in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we'll be discussing the flavored vape ban in Utah. The state recently banned the sale of most flavored vape juices and e-cigarette products as part of a crackdown to prevent access to teenagers and children. Joining me to discuss this is Beau Maxon, owner of Park City Vapor Company and Mid-City Vapor Lounge located in American Forks, Springville, and Payson. He is also a member of the Utah Vapor Business Association. And Matt MacPherson is also joining us. He's a Republican member of the Utah House of Representatives who introduced a bill in the last legislature that would have repealed the ban and would have allowed the continued sale of flavored vapes under new regulations. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to first start with Beau and then gradually move to Representative MacPherson. So, Beau, first of all, I'd like to start and ask you how you got into the vape business and how long you've been in it.
I first got into the vapor industry 8 years ago. 8 years ago in March, in fact. Previously, I worked for Invest Tools and TD Ameritrade for 4 years, was involved in investment education. And how I got into the vapor industry was really quite simple. That was back in 2017, and vape had really kind of started to gain some traction. And being in investments, I recognized that is where consumers were headed. Growing up, I was a athlete in high school and college and never touched cigarettes. I've always found them to be repulsive. And I recognized, hey, wait a second. It very much appears like we've got a product that is going to provide adult consumers with a less harmful alternative and, simultaneously going to make it easier to be around a smoker. Nobody likes to be around a traditional cigarette consumer just because they smell, they stink. It doesn't matter if they smoked 20 minutes ago, they still stink. And so I got into that industry. I opened up my first location in Park City and became politically active in 2018 after Juul had burst onto the scene. I recognized that there were some things that were going to need to change in our industry, some regulations that were going to need to be had, et cetera. And so I've been fighting on behalf of the state of Utah and the vapor consumers here in the state ever since then.
So let's talk about the ban that took place on March 24th of this year. Tell me what happened on that day.
We received the ruling from Judge Barlow stating that although he had given us the preliminary injunction on the unlawful search and seizure provision within Senate Bill 61, he severed it from the remainder of the bill. And as a result, it very much appears that the flavor ban will be going into effect. Interestingly enough, in the last 2 weeks, I've had several conversations with stakeholders across the state, as well as county health department directors. And it very much seems like we are in a limbo period. And that is directly from Eric Edwards from the Utah County Health Department. It very much appears that Senate Bill 61 is a bill that was passed to ban flavored vape and yet didn't really give the means in which to actually enforce. And, that's something that Representative MacPherson and I discussed at length. For many, many years, there's been laws that have been in effect on all things tobacco related, yet they've just not been enforced. And that's something that's got to change. And that's something Representative MacPherson's bill, House Bill 432, absolutely would have done.
I want to ask, what were the reactions from customers and employees when they first heard that the ban went into effect?
Great question. It's been pretty much just a handful of responses. One, it's absolutely ridiculous that the state banned flavored vape. They are adult consumers. They feel like they have the right to consume flavors, whether or not uh, those products are allowed by the state. They're going to continue to consume those products. We've had many customers already share with us that they are driving across state borders and purchasing in bulk and bringing those products back into the state. They are purchasing these products online, as there are many websites that still ship within or ship to the state of Utah. And then you also have something that I vocalized from the very beginning: black market. You've got a lot of individuals who are purchasing these products in bulk, and they're facilitating black market sales. Whether they're selling these products outside, out of their vehicle, or having them at their home and meeting up with friends, etc. And so consumers are still going to get these products regardless of this ban. And as a result, the state's going to miss out on the tax revenue, and they're going to put adult consumers in harm's way by not allowing these consumers to have access to regulated products. And it's unfortunate. Sentiment's been the same across the board.
So that, as far as the tax revenue, we will be discussing that later on when we discuss the economic impact of this vape ban. Have you spoken with other shop owners and employees, and what have they said?
Oh, they're heartbroken. We're actually attempting to get a count on just how many stores have already shut down. Representative MacPherson, I actually meant to send you a few videos that some of these store owners have already posted on social media. They've already closed their doors. And what stores are open have laid people off just because they don't have the financial revenue to continue to support the employees that they once had. And so, we're going to see a lot of these businesses close down, unfortunately, and it's a shame. A lot of people are very devastated. They're wondering what we can do next. We do intend to appeal the judge's ruling, and what that looks like has yet to be seen. But they're desperate. They're hoping for some sort of positive resolution. Otherwise, they're going to have to close their doors.
Throughout your time owning shops, what have customers said to you about vaping and what it has done for them?
It's kept them away from traditional combustible cigarettes. Many of these consumers smoked cigarettes for many years or decades, and vape has helped them get off of cigarettes. And they love flavors. I mean, at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of retail tobacco specialty businesses' sales, in particular with respect to any vape related products, it's flavored vape. Consumers don't want to vape tobacco. When you take a look at human senses, the sense of smell is the strongest sense related to memory. Why would a adult consumer want to vape a tobacco flavored vape just so it reminds them of their favorite cigarette? They're more inclined to want to step outside and hit a cigarette. And so they prefer these fruity flavors or dessert flavors. And it's my hope that one day those products are legally allowed to be sold in the state of Utah again.
So, as for anyone who, for some reason, may not be aware, vapes are a tool that is used by adults either as a substitute for smoking or as a means to stop smoking altogether. And over the years, there's been criticism of how young people or teenagers have gotten a hold of vapes. Some critics blame companies like Juul for advertising to young people specifically, while vape shops have also been targeted by parents and critics alike. Now, there was a KSL article from March 29th that has a representative from the Utah Department of Health and Human Services saying in regards to the anti-vape legislation, quote, "It was the youth themselves saying, no, this is what we're seeing. This is harmful to us, and we would like to see something change," unquote. Beau, if it's possible, could you tell me about some of the criticism that you've heard or faced, And also talk about some of the methods that your shops have used to keep people under the age of 21 from buying vapes.
Great question. Criticism, there certainly has not been a lack of it. We've received it at every which angle. And it's unfortunate that individuals like Representative MacPherson seem to be few and far between. And by that, I mean, they're actually willing to sit down and have a conversation and get educated on the product and the industry that we are in. Um, youth saying we want some sort of resolution. The Utah Vapor Business Association in the last many years has, in fact, really truly been the only one who has pushed any type of solutions. Back in the 2020 general session, we advocated to restrict flavored tobacco products to retail tobacco specialty businesses only. Those are 21 and over businesses. And when you take a look at compliance data, for example, the Salt Lake County Health Department in 2023 conducted hundreds of compliance checks on both general retailers like Maverick, Chevron, and those businesses failed at over 10% when it came to underage sales. And so when we really look at this and what solutions my industry has provided, we have far more robust ID scanners than what you will find in a general retail store, even the Utah State Liquor Store. And in Representative MacPherson's bill, these are things that we're looking to implement. ID scanners that cost over $4,000 a unit have 60 holographic scanning features, including laser proliferation, microprinting, and so they will catch fake IDs. You're not going to get a minor in one of our stores with those type of ID scanners. We were even willing to go to far greater lengths with respect to RFID tags and video surveillance requirements straight out of medical cannabis statute R66-5. So many things that we were looking at doing. And when you reference criticism, it's ironic that some of our largest or more vocal critics are individuals like Jen Daly Provost, who she's involved in every piece of medical cannabis legislation. And I also happen to be in medical cannabis. And when you take a look at 2019 in the state of Utah, when we had the Avali outbreak, that was because of black market THC cartridges that were cut with vitamin E acetate, lipid pneumonia. Here comes the medical cannabis program and regulated products, and that problem disappeared. How is it that an individual like Representative Provost could be such an advocate for medical cannabis and yet want to ban flavored vape, which even Dr. Heather Borsky for the Department of Health and Human Services, on record in a deposition when we sued the state when they banned 5%, went on record saying that vape is 85 to 95% less harmful than traditional cigarettes. Why would we want to destroy vape and push adult consumers back to traditional cigarettes? Why is that? How is somebody capable of taking a stance on this issue and then doing the complete opposite on the other? And it, in my opinion, really begs to ask the question, like, truly why? And it really boils down to money. I had a conversation with Nate Seacrest. He's the lobbyist for RJ Reynolds. And he said flat out, we want our market share back. You guys got too big. We want our market share back. And they've used the FDA PMTA process for the last decade in an attempt to monopolize an industry that they recognize they're not going to be able to compete in. RJ Reynolds, despite all of the money that they have, they cannot compete in this industry. They do not make a product as good as the products that we sell, and they know it. And so they've used the FDA and they used the Utah State Legislature to create a monopoly on the industry that they created. And keep in mind, the vape industry started because there are individuals out there who said, hey, I grew up watching my mother smoke, or, they were a smoker themselves. They didn't want to see others pick up that unhealthy habit. And so although vaping is not healthy, it's a safer and healthier alternative to traditional cigarettes. And that's what's pushed this industry over the last many, many years. And, honestly, we were doing a good thing. And with respect to youth use, the UVBA individuals like Representative MacPherson, and there are certainly others as well who understand, what this situation actually is and what's going on here. We all wanted to do something that was actually going to make a difference. And Representative MacPherson's bill, had that passed, I'm a firm believer that that would have become the gold standard in the United States with respect to tobacco regulation and youth prevention methodologies.
I know that in Europe their attitudes towards vaping is completely different than here in the United States. Just in their openness to it, and then it's actually wider, is widely available in European society as opposed to here in the United States. And what I wanted to ask is regarding some of the misconceptions about the vape industry and people who vape that need to be either dispelled or just set the record straight, especially for parents and critics.
Absolutely. So you reference some of what is seen in European countries. If we take a look at the UK, for example, the Royal College of Physicians, they came out, I believe it was in 1962 or 1963, and they stated traditional combustible cigarettes cause cancer. It took the FDA here in the United States 2 more years to come to that same consensus. And you referenced the UK with respect to their stance on vaping. It's more readily available. They're not critics of it, and they recognize it's a less harmful alternative than traditional cigarettes. I think one of the things that people should look at, though, is what is the Medicare system in the UK? How is that set up? And I don't want to come across as a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes, you know, sometimes the truth really is just that out in the open, and it's that obvious that I feel like sometimes people just don't want to see it. And let's call it for what it is. The United States signed the master settlement agreement with some of the largest tobacco manufacturers in the country. They signed that, and they signed that agreement saying they will pay a certain dollar amount every single year in sin tax for the right to kill 500,000 Americans every single year and make even more sick. Let's be real here. Big tobacco is a massive tax generator for every state in this country. They make people sick, and there's money made when people are sick. Healthy people don't make the Medicare system money. They don't make, health insurance companies money like that. Sick people do. And that's something that's not being talked about. These products are less harmful than cigarettes, and yet they're being destroyed. They're being put out. Why? And then, let's take a look at the state of Utah, for example, in the state registry. The only products that are allowed to be sold are big tobacco products. I mean, the math ain't mathin' if we're here to actually discuss youth prevention and youth use. It was a monopoly bill, nothing more. Senate Bill 61 was a monopoly bill. Big tobacco won. Healthcare companies won. Healthcare providers won. The large retailers like Maverick and Walmart won at the expense of the everyday Utah vape consumer. And it's unfortunate. And, again, talking about youth prevention, general retailers are failing at over 10%. And now all of a sudden I'm supposed to believe that they actually care about kids. They don't care about kids.
Speaking of that, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, vape use among junior high school and high school students in the United States dropped between 2023 and 2024. That's nationwide. The data shows that almost 6% of students reported using e-cigarettes, which was down from almost 8% in 2023. But regardless of that, young people are still getting a hold of vapes, like you mentioned. Now, according to Truth Initiative, which is a nonprofit working to eliminate tobacco use among young people, Almost 57% of young people received e-cigs from social sources like friends and family, and 43% got them from retail outlets like convenience stores and gas stations. Now, this question can be for either of you, but how do you think that the high percentage of young people getting e-cigarettes from friends and families rather than retail outlets impacts the effectiveness of vape bans on adult users?
Matt, would you like to answer that one, or?
Sure. So I think this is actually the crux of why SB 61 was so flawed, is that at least how it was presented 2 sessions ago was that this was the way to prevent youth from getting their hands on vaping products. And in order to do that, the goal was to cut off the supply. And the assumption always was, and it was always presented in this way, that the retail tobacco specialty shops is where the flavored vaping product was ending up in the hands of kids. And that has been shown many times to be wrong. It was something I presented when we presented our bill, HB 432. It was I went and interviewed a handful of principals at schools, elementary schools, junior high schools, and high schools, to ask them where the kids are getting their vaping products. And the number one place that principals told me they were getting it was from Snapchat. It was just online, usually through a stranger. But in many cases, they were getting them from friends or family. But again, if we trace the origin, where that product came from, the idea that these products all originally from a RTSB, one of these retail tobacco specialty shops, was just false. And we traced this information. We talked to the Attorney General. We met with law enforcement and spoke to local health authorities to find out as best we could where this product was coming from. And in most cases, products coming from either online or they're transporting it across state lines. But in many cases, it's this Chinese product that we have no idea what's in it. It's very inexpensive. It's unregulated. It comes in. We don't know what's being added to it when it gets here as well. We found a number of vapes that are being that they're putting syringes in. They're adding other product into it before they sell it to kids, and things like harder drugs like THC. Like also, we're seeing fentanyl in some of these products. And that's extremely dangerous and very, very scary. Yet, SB 61 doesn't make any effort to tackle or combat any of that. And this was kind of always the problem is that when we have at a regulated a storefront, like an RTSB, a place where we can perhaps throttle where the product hits the market. If we focus on everything but the RTSBs and try to close down all that illicit sort of pipeline, then we can actually create a regulatory environment that might make some difference in how this gets in the hands of kids. And SB 61 just ignored all of that. And it simply stated that we're going to cut off the legal supply of this product, and then we're just going to wait and see. And that is actually the goal. That's the goal of almost every legislator, both on the House and the Senate, whether in committee or on the floors when they voted either for or against this bill. In most cases, the sentiment was with SB 61, we just want to try it and see what happens. And I think I'm not necessarily opposed to that concept when it comes to most of our legislation. We do want to take chances. We want to try new ideas. And sometimes we do have to just kind of try to see what happens and put something in place. But with SB 61, what we're gambling with is a very dangerous thing. We're gambling with a product that, you're right, has been on the decline. And the alternative is much more dangerous. It's much more dangerous in the hands of kids too. And I think what was really clear is that what we're doing is we may be trying to tackle one problem, and maybe this will make some dent in the amount of youth usage and access in Utah. That's possible. I will admit that there's a possibility that'll make a dent. But when we look at the overall balance, the cost, what did we trade? Are we creating a whole new generation of smokers in schools? A product that has been, for the large part, been slowly declining for years amongst kids. Are we going to start seeing that grow again? That would be tremendously bad and not worth the exchange at all. So I apologize. I'm kind of going all over the place on this answer here, but I think it's really important to note that what SB 61 did in banning access didn't actually ban flavored vape sales in the state of Utah. It simply only prevented the RTSBs from selling the product. People can still buy it out of state, they can still buy it online, and they will. And it's been shown in other states that, as in fact, one of the reports that I brought into the House on the floor to talk about to my fellow legislators at the time that we were voting on this was looking at some of the data in states that had banned this product. And we had found in most cases, for every vape usage drop, for every 2 percentage points in vape drop, you added another 1 to 1.5% of smoking users. And that is not a good trade. As you know, and as we've discussed, it's a 10 to 20 times worse product. The health costs, the impact to society, the social aspects of it are dramatically worse. So we're making a very bad trade. So long roundabout answer to say, yes, I don't think that SB 61 will make as big of a dent in the youth access as the proponents of the bill wanted, but I think it's possible it still makes some difference. The question will be is, what did we trade for it? And what will we see in the data over time when it comes to smokers and other products, more dangerous vape products that'll still end up in the hands of kids?
So let me first of all ask, because I want to go ahead and tackle legislation after this, but I want to ask how you got involved with the Utah Vapor Association and what made you pursue this issue.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple answer. When SB 61 was first presented in my committee 2 sessions ago, I voted against it. I was the only vote against the bill. And when I was asked by the Vapor Association why, I told them originally that I'm not a smoker, I'm not a vapor, I don't have any interest in the product itself or the industry specifically, but I was a free market, small business, capitalist. I expect kind of a Utah to follow kind of a free market mentality when it comes to how we operate. We're very friendly to business in this state, generally speaking. And I felt that this bill sought to put a particular business out of business, a particular industry really, at the benefit of another industry. We really just created a winner and a loser legislatively. It wasn't a free market process. The people didn't choose this from a sales or from a market perspective. We just simply went into the law and created a winner, and we created a loser. And I felt like that was extremely contrary to, especially a Republican and a conservative like myself, to how I believe the state should operate and how state power should operate. And so after I voted against it, I had planned on, and I worked with the sponsor at the time to delay the implementation, at least provide the vape store owners some time to sell their remaining product, so they wouldn't just be simply out of business and in terrible debt. So I convinced the sponsor of the bill to delay the implementation of the bill to the end of the year. And then when the lawsuit from the Vapor Association against the state began, I decided to run a bill that would actually delay the implementation of the bill again till the end of the actually 2026 legislative session. That would have given us 2 sessions to actually fix what maybe we could fix in SB 61 if that was necessary. It would have prevented the lawsuit from moving forward because the bill would not be in effect. and give the legislature time to kind of reconsider our actions. And it was after I put that bill, I opened it, that the Vapor Association approached me and said, well, we know you didn't like this bill. We know you've got a bill open now to delay the implementation so we can fix this. Why don't you just try to fix it? So they convinced me that we should actually just put our heads together. And we did. And we worked really hard, I think, amongst all of us to come up with which Beau mentioned, I think was really kind of gold standard regulatory legislation on this issue. But at the end of the day, the conversation around this and the fact that SB 61 had already passed, rolling this back was actually much more difficult than I expected. If we had maybe put this in place and as an alternative to SB 61 last year, it probably would have had more legs, would have been my guess.
So I want to go over Senate Bill 61 for our viewers. It was passed in 2024 and enacted in March 24th of this year, like I mentioned. As a result, most, if not all, flavored vapes are now banned in Utah. The bill was sponsored by Senator Jen Plum, and according to the bill's text, SB 61 bans the sale of electronic cigarettes that haven't been approved or are waiting for approval from the Federal Food and Drug Administration. It also sets a nicotine limit for e-cigarette products, prohibits the sale of most e-cigarette products, and creates a registry for e-cigarette products as well. There was a stipulation in the bill which called for government officials to search a business to make sure they're complying with the law. The Utah Vapor Business Association, as stated earlier, sued the state, saying that the search was unconstitutional. That prevented the state from enforcing SB 61. That was until a federal judge ruled that the new law could be enforced, but without the search stipulation. Once that was cleared, it allowed for the ban to take effect. Now, going back to you, Matt, what more can you tell us about your work challenging this legislation? And tell us about, what is it, House Bill 432? Tell us a little bit about what that bill would have done.
Sure. So I guess to start at the end first, HB 432 was really established to create an alternative to SB 61, where 61 simply made a blanket ban. In addition to the ban that you mentioned, the FDA approval or pending, it also had a separate line in there that simply stated that the sale of flavored vaping products in the state of Utah was not approved. So even if products were to get through the FDA process, it would still be illegal in the state of Utah. So that's what SB 61 does. So HB 432, which I sponsored, took a different approach. It would still allow the sale of these products. It would still have a nicotine cap in place. It would still create a state registry for nicotine products. But what it would do was it would create a much more regulatory framework for how these products would be brought into the state of Utah, how they were sold, how they were used, and would actually try to tackle things like online sales, like third-party distribution, and things like just transporting it across state lines. And the way that this would be done is it's kind of interesting. The state registry was going to be used to create almost a custom product for the state of Utah. We spoke with several manufacturers and indicated that they would really have to create a product that would have to be specialized for Utah. This was actually important for us because it would allow us to, even on a casual site inspection of not only of a store, but also of a user of a product, you could tell whether that product originated from the state, through the state registry, through a legal store, if it was purchased illicitly, like online or over state lines. We also criminalized the possession of products that actually were not on the state registry. This was also part of that process too. In order to actually be able to tackle the products that came in outside of the registry, you kind of have to, I use the analogy, and I apologize if this may not hit for some people, but the analogy of the border wall. If your concern was that there were, illicit, whether it be drugs or weapons or even people that were crossing the border illegally, the first thing you have to do is you have to close down the border itself. You can't just put extra guards at the port of entry. That doesn't stop the problem. That's not where they're coming. So you have to go after the whole issue first before you regulate the pipeline where it comes in. So we had to kind of tackle, how do we stop this product from coming in? And so the caps and the state registry were important to do that. We had new regulations and fees and fines actually on the manufacturers and the distributors, the wholesalers that were selling the product into the state. A new way for them to identify which legal stores they were allowed to sell their products to and which they weren't. And then created a whole host of regulation around the RTSPs so that the product, if it was being sold out of a store, we could track it down to the product, to the individual who purchased it at the time they purchased, with new penalties and fines and new misdemeanors and new crimes, basically, on those individuals that sold. We even had a section in there for an interdicted person. If you had been convicted of selling or distributing a nicotine product to a minor, you could get interdicted and you would not be able to purchase that product legally for yourself in the state of Utah. So there's a number of kind of unique and interesting ways, new taxes that were going on the product, which I know a lot of people would be upset about if it had passed. But that money was going to be used to actually do the enforcement pieces. Kind of the biggest problem we have with SB 61, there's no enforcement, like Beau had mentioned. And this creates this limbo right now where it's technically illegal, but there's no way for us to really enforce it. And even what little enforcement was in the bill, the courts found unconstitutional. And so there's not really much other than we say it's illegal. We don't really do anything about it. And so what this new tax was going to provide was actually the muscle to allow the state and the locals to be able to enforce the provisions of this and keep this product out of the hands of kids, but still allow it to be purchased legally by adults, albeit at a slightly higher price and definitely at a much more difficult process, because there would be some more tracking and tracing of individuals, both with surveillance and with data that was being gathered on those individuals.
This next question could be for either one of you to answer, and you're both certainly welcome to. But why, in your experience trying to tackle this issue, what have you seen in regards to, like, for example, why have lawmakers gone after vapes so much as opposed to alcohol or some other more lethal substance?
You know, that's a fantastic question. In the entire time I've been in this industry, we have been compared to alcohol, which I think is interesting when you take into account, first off, alcohol consumption among youth in the state of Utah is higher at 11.2% than vaping is among youth. It's also has a far greater risk to any user, adult or youth, in the immediate future, right? You know, the best example would be I can sit behind the wheel of a car and vape all I want. I'm going to make it home safe. But if I get behind the wheel of a vehicle intoxicated, you know, very different situation, very different story. And yet the Utah State Liquor Store provides many, many different flavored alcohol options. And we even provided that list to many different legislative representatives during the session when we were having our conversations. And, you know, I think part of it boils down to is retail tobacco specialty businesses are privately owned, but the Utah State Liquor Store is owned and operated by the state, and it's the state that collects that revenue, and they get to disperse that revenue where they see best fit. And that is not the case with our industry. And I think it, as a result, creates a bias, if you will. If these products were to be sold in the Utah State Liquor Store, I think we would be having a very different conversation. Yet, coincidentally enough, I would like to add this. In the 8 years that I've been in this industry, I've used a ID scanner called the Identifake Plus, manufactured by a company called TokenWorks. They're based out of the East Coast. And it's a over $4,000 ID scanner, as I had shared with you earlier. It will catch fake IDs, and I've taken hundreds of fake IDs. In fact, people know now not to even come to my store if they're a minor because they're going to lose their ID. And every single time I would take a fake ID from a minor, they would respond with, "May I please have my fake ID back? That is the ID that I used to purchase alcohol from the state liquor store." And when you take a look at the ID scanner at the Utah State Liquor Store, it's a product manufactured by a company called Code. You can pull it up online. It costs $300. It is a glorified library card scanner. It's a 2D code bar scanner. That is it. And kids get fake IDs by the state liquor store every single day. And in fact, when we talk about youth prevention and who's actually serious about it, I had a private meeting with Senator Vickers, and I told him if he was as serious as I am about youth prevention and regulation, he would not only pass Representative MacPherson's bill, but he would do something about the state liquor store situation. I did the math. There's around 40 state liquor stores here in the state of Utah, on average 5 aisles per store. So it came out to about 205 aisles, 205 ID scanners. I told him I'm more serious about youth prevention than he is, so much so that I was willing to give the state the money to pay for all new ID scanners for the state liquor store. And naturally, Senator Vickers, as he has historically done, voted against, even though he didn't get an opportunity to vote for Representative MacPherson's bill. But in conversations that were had, he was in opposition to it. And so it's just like, why are we going to allow, chocolate buzzball teas? That is a flavored vodka for sale in the Utah State Liquor Store, chocolate buzzball teas. There's over 15,000 bottles. Why are we going to allow that to be sold and mango vape can't be sold? But I thought adults don't like flavors. They're not attracted to flavors. I beg to differ. I don't know too many 16-year-olds who have an appetite for Glenlivet Scotch on the rocks, but they certainly love Blueberry Stoli. But we're not having that conversation. Why is that? The age-old adage, follow the money. It doesn't lie. Who makes the money on alcohol here in the state of Utah? The Utah State Liquor Store does, and they get to dictate where that money goes. They don't get to do that with our industry.
Representative MacPherson, would you like to add to that?
I think when it comes to the legislators themselves, there's always a desire, it seems like, from many to just do something. And I know this is a common thing amongst most people. It was when they see a problem, they want to do something to fix it. And that's, I think, been part of the problem here, is that there was a problem, and there still is a problem, with kids having access to all sorts of products, whether it's alcohol, whether it's vape, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's other drugs. They have access and they're using these products. They usually typically start these experimenting with these at around the same ages, and they typically fall into the same sort of category of kids that do so, same socioeconomic and kind of family scenarios, where they start using these products and experimenting. And it doesn't really matter what the product of the day is. These kids tend to start trying these things out, and they'll find one, and sometimes they'll stick with them, sometimes they'll give it up. But this has been true for decades, for probably much longer than that. And I think that there was just a moment when this was brought to the forefront several years ago, especially during 2020, when kids are no longer at school, and parents are finding out that their kids are addicted to nicotine, perhaps through a vape. Something they perhaps didn't know because they were at school all day. And now they brought this up to the legislature, and then starting in 2021 or so, 2022, we started seeing these rapid legislative sort of knee-jerk reactions to this, trying to fix the problem, so to speak. And everyone got kind of amped up in this idea that we've got a problem that we can fix. And I think that I don't personally blame any legislator who voted against my bill. I think that they're wrong. I don't think any of them were personally motivated by greed or by the tobacco industry, but many of them I think were fooled, and I think that's been kind of the problem. There were a lot of people that just their intentions were pure. They had these desires to do such, and they had set in their minds that what they were doing was right, and they couldn't listen to another alternate position. Now, many of them did, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful I had a chance to finally present the bill on the House floor despite a lot of challenges. But at the end of the day, I think that many legislators still believe that this is the best approach to take to prevent kids from having access to these products. And I think that we're going to find ourselves, I'm pretty confident that we're going to find ourselves back in legislation in the next 2 to 3 years, probably fixing what SB 61 left behind.
I think Beau had mentioned the tobacco. I think both of you have mentioned the tobacco lobby, big tobacco influencing politicians. Is there a way to know specifically how they influenced lawmakers to design or vote for a flavored vape ban?
My insight to that is a little bit lower. The funny enough, the tobacco lobby spends much more time and money with the Senate than they do with us in the House. And for whatever reason, I see them, I chat with them once in a while, but they tend to spend most of their efforts on the Senate side. And they didn't get a chance to hear this bill, so I don't know how that would have played out. But on the House side, there were plenty of other factors playing in there. I think, generally speaking, the tobacco lobby tried to pretty much stay hands off of the House side as much as possible. At least they told me that they were, simply because they knew what Beau was saying here. They knew that this bill was a tremendous blessing for them. It was a humongous opportunity for them to really capitalize on this legislation and recapture this market. And so they wanted to just stay quiet and pretend like they didn't exist. Because I do think that the argument could have been made, and it was by some. I didn't ever push this argument that this was in fact a really, really friendly big tobacco bill. And it was, but some people, obviously the sponsors of this bill were very adamantly opposed to that sort of painting of the bill. And again, whether it was their intent or not, I think the bill absolutely benefited the big tobacco lobby and industry. But as far as how their influence played on the House side, I didn't see much of it other than them trying to stay completely silent as much as possible. But I did see them having lots of conversations and discussions with the Senate side, but I'm not privy to what those conversations were. And we didn't get to see how it played out because we didn't get to see them vote.
Well, and if I may add to it as well, I may not be a lobbyist, but as I've shared previously, I've been the vice chairman of the UVBA for 8 years, and I have been the individual who represents the UVBA working directly with the state legislature. I've also participated in every single deposition in every single lawsuit the UVBA has filed against the state. And I can tell you that Senate Bill 61's original intent was not as it has played out. Senator Plum wanted to legislatively impose a nicotine restriction. A number of years ago, the UVBA sued the state of Utah. At that time, it was the Utah Department of Health, now DHHS. They had administratively banned 5%, but they failed to follow the administrative rulemaking process. And although my industry would tell you, from a financial perspective, it was in our best interest that 5% be banned. Why? Because a traditional cigarette consumer, the product that's most effective to allow them to transition from cigarettes to vape is 5% nicotine. And so if that consumer is now restricted to 3%, they're going to have to consume more product to get their nicotine fix. And so when the state banned 5%, our industry saw an uptick in sales. However, we weren't okay with UDO imposing that administrative ban because they simply didn't follow the process. So if we didn't make them adhere to the law and the rulemaking process, what's going to prevent them from continuing to take more and more and more without following the rules? So we sued them. We won. And in that lawsuit, Braden Ainsworth, who works with the the Department of Health and Human Services at that time, UDO, even stated on record there was no factual basis to restricting 5% and capping it at 3%. And in fact, they utilized an entity called the Research Institute Triangle, or RTI, Research Triangle Institute, excuse me. And that organization compiled years worth of data from all over the country and determined that banning 5% made no sense. They actually instructed the Department of Health to not do it. They said, there's no basis to it. We think you're making a mistake. And Braden Ainsworth even acknowledged that in that deposition. And so when Senate Bill 61 was originally drafted, when you take a look at that first draft, it was a legislative cap on nicotine content, one of which we would have only opposed simply due to the fact that it helps consumers transition to vape who, have previously been using traditional combustible cigarettes. I was informed that Senator Plum wanted that bill, as did Representative Brammer, now Senator Brammer, wanted to restrict 5% and restrict it to 3%. It was then that RJ Reynolds and Nate Seacrest provided the language for what is now Senate Bill 61. Senator Plum had a conversation with one of our lobbyists and said that Nate Seacrest lied to me and did not share with me in its entirety what this language was going to do. But a deal had already been made between her and Senator Kurt Cullimore. And Senator Kurt Cullimore was the real driving force behind Senate Bill 61, not Senator Plum. And I have that confirmed by multiple sources. It was Senator Cullimore. And that language came straight from RJ Reynolds. So I share that with you because, like Representative MacPherson said, Senate Bill 61 in its current form is a huge win for big tobacco. It's also a huge win for the Retailer Association, businesses like Maverick, Chevron, Walmart, Walgreens, etc. And it just so happens to be that Senate President Adams is a landlord to businesses like Maverick, like Kroger, who owns Smith's. And when you take a look at our industry and the sales that this industry conducts on an annual basis, it's anywhere, between $2 to upwards of over $300 million a year. And that's enough money to get people to look for creative ways in which to implement a piece of legislation that creates a monopoly for the retailers for big tobacco. And as Nate Seacrest said to me, when he took me to lunch in November of 2023 and let me know Senate Bill 61 was coming and a flavor ban was coming, that they wanted their market share back.
This was really pushed as a win for children and for keeping kids safe and all that. But what you're saying is that it's just dressed like that. It doesn't actually do that.
Correct. If anything, it does a complete opposite. Representative MacPherson's bill, as I stated, would have been the gold standard. And from an industry perspective, would have been a kick in the nuts. It would have been a difficult transition for this industry and the business owners in it. It would have also been expensive. Our sales tax would have gone up significantly. The equipment that we would have been required to purchase would have been expensive. It would lead to decreased margins, et cetera. It would have made it harder to conduct business. And yet, I can tell you our industry still would have participated and would have enjoyed seeing that bill go into effect, because at the end of the day, adult consumers would still be able to purchase the products that they desire. And we know for a fact that all of the things that House Bill 432 would have done would have actually made an impact on youth use, as well as taken more market share away from big tobacco, which really truly is the perpetrator in all of this. And when you take a look at the Triton case, there was some significant headway on a federal level that was pushing against big tobacco. And so big tobacco elected to take it state by state as opposed to using the FDA. And it really is unfortunate, because um, I am a believer in what Representative MacPherson said. This topic is going to be discussed again in the 26th general session, or perhaps the 28th general session once the sharp survey data comes out, because every single place you look where flavored tobacco products have been banned, youth usage has gone up, traditional combustible cigarette usage has gone up. And so when we see this data come out in November of 2025, I personally feel like we're going to see youth use has increased um, from the 2023 Sharp survey data. And if it doesn't necessarily reflect that this year because of the ban having just taken effect, then I think we will undoubtedly see it in the 2027 Sharp survey data, which would lead us to a 2028 general session conversation. And the unfortunate reality, though, is how many businesses will be around. The Utah state legislature really made a mistake here, because there's far uh, they had the regulatory structure. When you take a look at the retail tobacco specialty business industry, they had the structure to, in essence, turn retail tobacco specialty businesses into a tobacco pharmacy, if you will. They could have done similar regulations that we see in medical cannabis pharmacies, and really, crack down on enforcement, whether they be straw man sales or online sales, social media sales, or importing, in mass quantities from across state lines, et cetera. And the state could have collected their revenue. And when we talk about revenue, it's really important to note that in Representative MacPherson's bill, we were giving the state of Utah $24 million a year in tobacco enforcement funding. And the state currently allocates $15 million a year. We were nearly tripling it. And they said no. Why is that? It's contradictory to their very argument: youth prevention, youth use. Why would you not accept triple the amount of enforcement funding to actually crack down? And it frankly begs to ask the question, is that by design? Big tobacco, they don't want their consumers to go away. They don't want their consumers to go away. And in so many ways, they benefit from a market or industry that lacks regulation, that provides means for youth to gain access to their products. And I think for any individual who's willing to sit down and do the homework like Representative MacPherson did, which from the very beginning, I was extremely impressed with you, Matt. But then as we continued to work together more and more, you know, you said it at the beginning of this call, you're not a consumer of these products. You never have been, never will be. I know your personal story with respect to, family having used these products and where you sit. You were not here to do the industry any favors. You were here to actually make a difference. And your bill would have done that. And it's unfortunate that so many members of the Utah State Legislature were unwilling to sit down with my association, who knows this industry better than anybody. And we had a meeting Representative MacPherson and I had a meeting with former Representative Paul Ray, now with DHHS, as well as Braden Ainsworth and a few other individuals. We had an extremely productive conversation, and they were on board. We had regulatory agencies that were on board with Representative MacPherson's bill until they weren't. And they weren't because the LDS Church stepped in and said that despite the fact that Representative MacPherson put together an incredible bill, they simply could not get behind it because they were morally opposed to flavors being lawfully allowed to be sold. And so they chose moral high ground over youth prevention and youth protection. Other representatives who I spoke with chose moral high ground because it didn't sit with their moral belief, as opposed to actually doing their homework on a bill that has an impact on several 100,000 Utahns. And if there's anything that I walked away with after this legislative session, it is that unfortunately our legislature is a part-time legislature, and yet they're making decisions that are not part-time. And they're voting based upon a conversation that they may have had with the Eagle Forum or with other individuals who just said, you know what, my kids smoke this and I don't want them smoking it. We've got to do something. Let's just ban it. And that's acting like the boogeyman doesn't exist. There's no resolution there. It was a ban on paper and nothing more. But what it did do, and I think this is what many individuals wanted to see, it has put already in just a few short weeks many businesses in the retail tobacco specialty space out of business. And it will continue to. You're going to see more and more businesses closing. And I think, in truth, that's what many individuals wanted to see. They do not care about youth prevention or youth use. They just wanted to see these businesses go out of business.
It's important for everyone to know is during the legislative session, the day that I presented this bill, actually just shortly after I presented it and it failed on the House floor, I had reached out previously to the Trump administration, to their to the FDA, to find out what the plan was, because news had just come out earlier that day that they had actually had given pending status to a handful of flavored vaping products, which is the first time that they had done that. And so I'd reached out to find out what was the intention of the FDA when it came to these products. President Trump has made it clear in his own personal statements that he intends to make flavored vaping more accessible as a means to get people off of smoking. And with the FDA's recent change, I'd asked, is your intention to continue to allow more products to get into the pending process and start FDA approvals? So they did respond to me. Unfortunately, it was several days after the vote, but they had responded and said that two things. Yes, that they were intending to allow pending and approval status, or at least start the process of getting approval for many flavored vaping products. And that was important for them. The other aspect of the question, though, is what are they going to do, though, about states? Because there's a lot of states now that have made bans like Utah. And so if the intention of the federal government is to make these products more accessible, but states are individually banning them, do they intend to use any sort of processes or procedures or pass any federal laws through the Congress to protect access to this at the state level? All they could respond in that regard is that they were looking into it. So my experience is whether we stick with this ban, whether the state approaches this again in 2-3 years, I think realistically we're going to still see a change over the next 4 years of the current administration in their approach and how they deal with these products. And I think that many states like Utah are going to have to reconsider what we've done here and start trying to tackle this problem more holistically than what we did here.
It appears that Senator Plum and many supporters of this vape ban might not have any personal experience with smoking or vaping, or they more than likely have never entered a vape shop before. And of course, this could obviously affect how they view the issue. And I want to ask you, Beau, because you've worked with the legislature and because you work with Senator or Representative MacPherson on this on House Bill 432 and other vape legislations, before making decisions about vaping regulations, what do you think are factors that need to be considered from those making such decisions, if that makes sense?
To actually get educated on the subject. Interestingly enough, Senator Plum, we had one meeting with her in the 2024 general session, not one meeting in the most recent session. And in the one meeting we had with her, she was quite combative. It was myself, Senator Bramble, Senator Plum, and uh, my attorney Ben Dyer, and that was it. And she didn't really care to know, didn't care to have any type of uh, positive or constructive conversation. You would think that if somebody was looking to pass legislation that would have such an impact, that they would do everything they could to amass as much information as possible on the subject and make an informed decision. And that's where my comment comes back from. It's unfortunate that the Utah state legislature is a part-time legislature, because you've got individuals who are making decisions that impact the state as a whole, and not part-time, but every single day. And they're making decisions on industries that they have no understanding of whatsoever. And yet here's somebody like me who has never touched a cigarette, never will, grew up hating cigarettes. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada originally. I'm 35 years old. I remember when Joe Camel was allowed to be put on television, and I remember seeing all the Dare campaigns, etc. I'm of the age that I remember all of those things, and how cigarettes were pushed, how I saw them in casinos every single day, etc. And I got into this industry because I wanted to make a positive difference, and I wanted to help consumers.
We talked earlier about the economic impact of the vape industry, at least here in Utah. And I just want to go out and throw out some figures here. Nationally, the vapor industry contributed about $980 million in federal tax revenue in 2024. That's according to Vapor Technology Association. They are a national advocacy group for vape users and businesses. The vape industry also generated about $5 billion in state and local tax revenue, nationally, of course. As for Utah specifically, in 2023, the vapor industry contributed about $107 million to Utah's economy. And that impact spans three key categories, which is direct impact through jobs and wages created by the vape shops, supplier impact involving businesses that support the vape industry with materials and services, and induced impact, which is when reflects how employees' spending creates ripple effects through the local economy. What's more, the industry added $42.8 million in tax revenue, which helped fund essential services in the state. And you can view all of these reports in the VTA website. I'll provide the links for that in the description. Now, bear in mind that Utah just lost the Sundance Film Festival, which contributed more economically to the state, but the vape industry contributed over 3 times more in tax revenue than the Sundance Film Festival did. I wanted to ask you, because you've been involved with this for a while, how will this ban affect the state's economy now that it no longer has that tax revenue and economic contribution?
Good question. That would be difficult for me to attempt to quantify. However, the figures that you just spoke of undoubtedly is revenue that the state would be better off having than not having. But to the extent of the impact that it will have, uh, hard for me to say.
What do you think is next in regards to just appealing the ban and for the vape industry here in Utah?
We are going to proceed forward in our appeal. Our hope is that we come out victorious in that. I do feel that it will, in that appeal, the court is going to find that in the weeks that this has been in effect, dozens of shops have already closed. My hope is that that may help them change their mind and see this for what it really is. And should we fail in that appeal, then what we will see is we will see youth use increase as a result of a prohibition and the black market that will rise as a result of it. And whether it be in the 2026 general session or the 2028 general session after the sharp survey data is revealed and we are able to see that youth use has increased, it would be my assumption that the state legislature would look to revisit House Bill 432. And it's unfortunate because that's going to mean youth that otherwise could have been saved will then become consumers of these products as a result of that black market. And it also means that businesses that would have been there to lawfully facilitate adult consumers' needs, as well as for the state to be able to derive tax revenue from for enforcement programs, many of those businesses will no longer be there by the time the 2026 general session rolls around, let alone the 2028 general session. So the state, they made a big mistake and they're going to find out. And I feel very confident in this because I am an industry expert. I do know this industry very well, as do my colleagues. We know better than even the state health departments where kids are getting these products. Why? Because when a minor then turns 21 and they come into my business and they tell me exactly what they want and what they're looking for, it goes without saying they've been using these products well before they were of legal age. And then, being the vice chairman of the UVBA and having these conversations with the legislature and the Department of Health and Human Services, I always make it a point to ask these new customers of mine, hey, you just turned 21 and yeah, it's abundantly clear you've been using these products for some time. How are you getting these products? They tell me how they get it. And the legislature refused to listen to us, the people who know better than anyone. Instead, they chose to look at us as or as Jen Plum so eloquently put it, she referred to us as perennial predators. And yet, how is it that individuals in my industry, so-called perennial predators, were the only ones actually looking to provide solutions to youth use? If anything, we're the ones who actually care, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is, and we've been willing to go through all of the turmoil and scrutiny and criticism that we have because we're willing to take those punches because we want to do the right thing. And it's unfortunate that the legislature is destroying the industry that is actually doing the most to prevent youth use. So with that, myself and many other individuals in this industry, we're going to do what we can over the next few years, however long it takes for the legislature to recognize they made a horrible decision, and subsequently youth use rises as a result of it, and we'll have to come back to the table and have a conversation then. And at that point, I think it would be appropriate to call people out. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a engineer. I'm not an individual in one of those fields specialized to be able to discuss, laws in and out or discuss what makes the most sense engineering wise to build new communities and build roads. But what I am is a relatively smart guy who happens to have spent nearly a decade in this industry. And in this industry, I am an expert. And the legislature, in large, refused to listen to the experts. And they made an ill informed decision, and it's going to come at the cost of youth. It's also going to come at the expense of adult consumers who are now going to subject themselves to completely unregulated products by purchasing those products through black market sources. And so I look forward to the day when I get to say, I told you so.
We've been speaking with Beau Maxon with the Utah Vapor Business Association and Utah House Representative Matt MacPherson, who had to leave early. Thank you both for being here either way and for sharing your wisdom and experience on this issue. It's been a pleasure having you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.